Every few centuries, someone walks into history with a request so absurd it should be rejected before the ink dries. In 1855, William Walker looked at Nicaragua and decided its border was less a fact than a suggestion. He arrived with 58 men. Less than a year later, that group project had placed Walker inside the presidential palace. Then, he legalized slavery, provoked 5 nations, and turned a civil war into a fight for Central America's sovereignty.
The man who stole an entire country.
William Walker. Born in Nashville in 1824. Requested property, Nicaragua. Walker finished university at 14 and earned a medical degree at 19. He had a complete resume before most people had finished becoming people. Medicine became law. Law became journalism. By his mid-20s, he had collected 3 respectable careers. His 4th career would be invading countries. Walker's problem was not failure. Ordinary success simply seemed too small to hold his attention. In California, he edited newspapers, challenged powerful men, and fought duels over insults most adults would have answered with a strongly worded letter. The word that defined him was filibuster. In the 1850s, a filibuster was a private adventurer who recruited armed men and entered another country without legal authority. The official term was unauthorized. The practical term was invasion. The United States prohibited these expeditions, but manifest destiny had trained many Americans to see expansion as progress and borders as temporary administrative errors. For some promoters, new territory also meant new slave states and more southern power. Illegal conquest could be sold as patriotic, profitable, and heroic, especially to people who would not be doing the dying. Before Nicaragua, Walker rehearsed the idea in Mexico. In 1853, he left San Francisco with 45 armed men and enough confidence to require its own boat. The plan had 3 steps: seize territory, declare a government, and hope recognition arrived before reality. At La Paz, Walker captured officials and announced a republic that existed mostly on paper, at gunpoint, and wherever his men happened to be standing. He named himself president, then added Sonora, a region he did not control. The map department has asked us to emphasize that drawing a border is not the same as owning what is inside it. Reality answered with hunger, desertion, Mexican resistance, and a desert completely unimpressed by his stationery. By May 1854, the paper republic had disappeared. Walker crossed back into the United States and surrendered. Federal prosecutors had a ship manifest, weapons, proclamations, and a flag for the country he had invented. The evidence was not hiding. The jury acquitted him after only minutes. It returned so quickly the judge may not have finished sitting down. Walker had attempted to manufacture a country, lost it, and come home more famous. Failure had not punished the idea. It had purchased advertising. Walker did not need a new dream. He needed a better doorway. Nicaragua was not an empty stage waiting for an American. It was already trapped in a civil war between rival coalitions centered in León and Granada. The Democratic coalition in León fought the legitimist government in Granada. Both were Nicaraguan, both had armies, and both understood that control of the country was still undecided. Desperate for an advantage, Democratic representatives contracted Walker to bring armed colonists who would fight on their side. Nicaragua also contained one of the fastest routes between the Atlantic and Pacific. This was before the Panama Canal, when crossing the continent required creativity and several tickets. Passengers traveled by riverboat, crossed Lake Nicaragua, moved overland, then boarded another ship. 2 oceans, 1 lake, 1 narrow country, and no convenient refund policy. Cornelius Vanderbilt's Accessory Transit Company operated much of that route. Control the route, and you could move passengers, weapons, recruits, and money between coasts. In this war, geography was not background, it was infrastructure. Walker saw all 3 opportunities at once: a divided government, a strategic corridor, and a contract that placed armed Americans inside the country legally enough to to begin.
On June 16, 1855, he landed at El Realejo with 58 Americans. Admirers later called them the Immortals. At the time, mortality remained very much on the schedule. Walker drilled them hard and relied on rifles that could reach farther than many opposing weapons. 58 men were still 58 men, but range made the number feel larger. His first major test came at Rivas. Walker attacked and discovered that medical school, law school, journalism, and confidence could not make a city surrender on command. The assault failed. Men died. Walker withdrew. Nicaragua delivered the same lesson Mexico had tried to teach him. A proclamation is not control. But Walker adapted. He coordinated more closely with Nicaraguan allies, protected his riflemen, and waited for ground that favored him. At La Virgen in September, legitimist forces attacked. Walker's firing line held, and concentrated rifle fire broke the assault. That victory changed his status. He was no longer the strange foreign contractor with an alarming resume. He was now the Democratic Coalition's most effective commander. It also opened the road to Granada, the rival capital, the political prize, and the place every ambitious map arrow was now pointing. Walker avoided the obvious road. He used a transit steamer, crossed Lake Nicaragua, and arrived before his enemies expected him. For once, the transportation plan worked exactly as advertised. On October 13, 1855, his forces entered Granada. The man who arrived with 58 Americans now held the opposition's most important city. A peace settlement created a provisional government under Patricio Rivas. On paper, Rivas was president. In practice, Walker commanded the army and controlled the capital. The paper and the practice were no longer speaking. Walker installed allies, ran a bilingual newspaper, and used arriving ships to increase the American presence around him. The transit route became his lifeline. It delivered volunteers from the United States faster than neighboring governments could organize against him. Nicaraguan responses varied. Some supported the new order. Some accepted it after years of civil war. Others recognized immediately that the hired commander was becoming the government. General Ponciano Corral, once part of the settlement, secretly warned neighboring leaders that the Americans intended to dominate Nicaragua. The letters were intercepted. Corral was court-martialed and executed. Political disagreement had become a military offense. Walker's job title had changed from contractor to commander to final judge. Across Central America, governments reached the same conclusion. If Walker could convert one civil war into personal rule, their own borders might be next. He had not stolen a country yet, but he had placed himself between Nicaragua and nearly every institution meant to govern it. The claim was becoming less ridiculous by the day. Costa Rican President Juan Rafael Mora called his country to arms. He presented Walker not as Nicaragua's private problem, but as a regional threat. Costa Rican forces defeated a filibuster detachment at Santa Rosa and pushed into Nicaragua. At Rivas, fighting moved through streets, buildings, and close defensive positions. Walker survived. Cholera then struck the Costa Rican army and traveled home with returning soldiers, turning the campaign into a national catastrophe. The campaign paused. Walker used the pause to remove the last fiction that somebody else governed Nicaragua. An election was organized under conditions opponents denounced as coercive and fraudulent. Walker reported an overwhelming victory, which is easier when armed power supervises the arithmetic. On July 12, 1856, William Walker was inaugurated President of Nicaragua. The impossible claim had acquired a sash, a ceremony, and official stationery. The title was real. The sovereignty beneath it remained contested. Washington briefly recognized Walker's government. In the American South, supporters celebrated the possibility of another pro-slavery foothold in Central America. On September 22, 1856, Walker revoked Nicaragua's earlier prohibitions and made slavery legal again. The decree was designed to attract Southern support and connect his project to the expansion of slave society. It revealed that Americanization was not a neutral slogan. It threatened the freedom and political order of people already living there. At the same time, Walker attacked the business system keeping him supplied. He canceled the transit company's concession and transferred its privileges to rivals of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Walker had now offended neighboring republics, Nicaraguan opponents, and the man connected to his boats. Vanderbilt did not need to invade Nicaragua. He needed Walker's enemies to understand the transit machinery better than Walker did. His agents helped Costa Rican forces target the river and lake network carrying Walker's reinforcements. The war would be decided by battles, and by boats, contracts, fuel, and timing. Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Costa Rica, and Nicaraguan forces converged against the filibuster regime. The coalition was not perfectly united. Its governments had rivalries, competing commanders, and different aims. What kept pulling them back into alignment was Walker. Walker still had veteran officers and disciplined riflemen. New recruits arrived from the United States, promised land, pay, adventure, or a place in the order he intended to build. But the arithmetic had turned against him. Every casualty cost more. Every replacement took longer. Every shipment depended on a route his enemies were closing, one dock at a time. In late 1856, Allied troops pressed toward Masaya and Grenada. The war became a contest of streets, churches, rooftops, and fortified houses. Walker attacked at Masaya and withdrew. At Grenada, the city that symbolized his rise became a tightening trap. His greatest advantage had always been movement. Steamers moved recruits, rifles projected power, and surprise kept him ahead of slower governments. Now movement reversed. Allied forces captured positions along the San Juan River and seized key steamers. The glowing line connecting Walker to the United States went dark, section by section. Without the route, Walker was no longer a president with an army. He was a besieged commander with shrinking ammunition and nowhere safe to move. Then Walker made the decision that would define how Nicaragua remembered him. In November 1856, Walker ordered Grenada abandoned and destroyed so Allied forces could not use it. His men burned homes, public buildings, and churches in one of Nicaragua's oldest colonial cities, while Allied troops closed around them. The destruction was not elegant strategy. It was denial, punishment, and a warning written across a city. When Walker's soldiers escaped, they left a message. Aquí fue Granada. Here was Granada. The words were intended to intimidate. Instead, they became evidence of what his rule had become. A project willing to erase a city rather than release control. Burning Granada did not reopen the transit route. Costa Rican forces and their allies continued capturing river positions and steamers. Reinforcements stopped. Food and ammunition tightened. Disease spread. Desertion reduced the force around Rivas. By spring 1857, Allied armies surrounded Walker. The man who had repeatedly moved faster than governments could no longer move at all. United States Naval Commander Charles Henry Davis entered the crisis and negotiated an evacuation. On May 1, 1857, Walker surrendered to Davis and left aboard an American vessel. He did not surrender directly to the Central American armies that had defeated him. Walker departed alive and still claimed legitimacy. Behind him, Nicaraguan and Allied forces reclaimed the country he had tried to reorganize around himself. Back in the United States, supporters welcomed Walker. Newspapers followed him. He began planning a return. He launched more expeditions: ship out, interception, return, new map, repeat. Each failure convinced him that the next voyage would somehow restore what he called his government. In 1860, Walker landed in Honduras, hoping to use the coast as another route back toward Nicaragua. A British naval officer captured him and transferred him to Honduran authorities. This time, there was no sympathetic American jury on the other side of the door. On September 12, 1860, William Walker was executed by firing squad in Trujillo. He was 36. His short career exposed a dangerous combination: private ambition, commercial power, racial ideology, civil conflict, and spectators willing to applaud conquest from a safe distance. Walker did not literally steal Nicaragua. A country is more than a palace, a ballot box, an army, or a foreign recognition letter. Nicaraguans and their Central American allies proved it by taking those institutions back. William Walker reached the capital and briefly made the impossible claim look real. Central America wrote the ending. The country fought back, and the border remained where its people put it.